This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.
Hello, welcome to Politico Live. I'm Gian Volpicelli. I am a technology reporter with the Politico team, and I'm going to be moderating this crackerjack discussion about generative AI and how to regulate it. The subtitle is Generative AI Models and the Global Collaboration, which I find very optimistic. Anyway, let's invite our speakers to the stage. We have Dragos Tudorache, the co-rapporteur of the European Union's AI Act. Oh, wow, a rock star welcome here, anywhere. And Andrew Wood, Economic Counsel from the UK mission in the EU.
We both got an applause.
I think that joining us remotely, I should also have Austin Carson, founder and president of SeedAI, a foundation dedicated to AI education and promoting more equitable and more accessible AI in the US. And Karine Perset.
Thank you.
Yeah, also her, chair of the OECD AI Policy Observatory. Welcome both. So, what are we going to talk about today? I suppose that you know, generative AI has been all the rage for quite a while. We have all tried to use ChatGPT. We have seen possibly image-generating AI such as DALL-E. And of course, apart from being a big object of entertainment and amusement and productivity, it's also become a hot potato in terms of regulation. Everybody wants to regulate generative AI. It seems to be one of the most urgent items on the global regulatory agenda. We've seen, of course, the AI Act in the EU is kind of grappling with some elements of it. The G7 is working on it. And so is the UK in a way, even if in a limited way, not a kind of generalized way. But generative AI seems to be the biggest target, the current biggest target of regulatory efforts around the world. Okay, well, before we start, I'll just remind you that you can submit questions via Slido, and you can also answer our fantastic poll about what is the most important priority when it comes to regulating generative AI. I've spoken for far too long, so Dragos, let's start with you. I want to really understand what is the situation when it comes to international efforts at regulating generative AI. And you just fresh from...
Just remind you that you can submit questions.
Good, fair enough.
Slido, and you can also answer our...
You can. I'm not sure why it was. Anyway, you just off the plane from the US. You were in Washington to discuss some of these topics. You met key lawmakers in Washington, and you clearly talked about it, you told me. So what's the movement? What's going on in terms of tackling this as a united bloc or as a united nation?
Well, thank you very much, Gian, and many thanks to Politico for inviting me. I think it's fair to start, and not only because we are Europeans and we are proud of that, but I think it's fair to start with the effort that was done here in the European Union on generative AI, which preceded all the rest of the hype around the world, a hype that started sometime end of last year, November
2022, right?
When ChatGPT hit the screens. And we were already back in 2020, 2021 in Parliament when organizing hearings with a special committee on AI. We had various experts warning us about foundation models. Warning us in the sense of, listen, you may not be paying attention to it now.
Do you use foundation model as a synonymous with generative AI?
Yes, let's say the foundation model is the broader species of generative AI, but ultimately with the same characteristics which actually prompt the whole discussion about the need to set some standards or some rules around how it is being developed. So already back then, as policymakers, we asked ourselves the question, can we afford to go through the legislative process of having an AI Act, which is meant to be a horizontal set of rules addressing AI, without dealing with generative AI?
Right.
We were looking at the efforts and the discussions that were taking place in Council, where they did try to deal with what they were calling general purpose AI, and then eventually decided not to. We had also discussed with the Commission to understand why in the initial draft they hadn't put forward rules on that. But again, us in Parliament, having gone through all of those rounds of discussions with key experts, we had politically answered ourselves the question, should we, with a big yes.
The answer being?
A big yes.
Right.
And already a few months before November, when ChatGPT again brought everyone's attention to it, we had already discussed and agreed in the political team in Parliament, negotiating the text, that we will try to write up a new regime for foundation models and specifically for generative AI inside the AI Act, which is eventually what we did.
Yeah.
And then later on, already since early spring, the world started to wake up and open their eyes to generative AI, and then we...
I woke up because it was a product, right?
we had a whole series, first, of letters, interestingly coming from the industry. I think it's the first time that's happening. I wrote a letter as a reaction to a letter. The
correspondence.
First, correspondence, yes, with I think there were
we
about 1,000.
We can get back to the letter later.
Yes,
but
yes.
Dragos, you should tell me what happened in Washington. So everybody wants to regulate generative AI. What did you tell
I've gone to Washington
opposite
often
numbers
in the last 3 years, and always as part of my journey, AI was a topic. This is the first time around last week when I felt that the US had also gone past the question if. And this is a big, important move on the US side. Until 5-6 months ago, whenever I would ask, listen, okay, what are you thinking? You see, we Europeans are doing that. There is also a global conversation on that. And at least up on the Hill, I never felt that there was a genuine and significant enough, or a critical mass, let's say, of political will to do something about it. And last week, I felt the difference. I spoke to all of the key senators and members of the House that are working on AI, including as they call them, the Big Four, the group of senators under the lead of Senator Schumer, organizing the forums that we all see. And again, if you listen to any of the speeches that they are now publicly delivering almost every day, it is a speech that could very well fit here in Europe. So they are looking at the same balance between safeguards and innovation. They are looking at transparency. They are looking at oversight. Right. So they use all of the key words that we used 3 years ago when we were asking ourselves, should we go down the path of regulating AI? So I think that there is a new sense of urgency and purpose in Washington for that. Now the question is how, and how much what they will choose to do, whenever they will choose to do it, because that's a question also as to when and how quick they will be putting forward legislation. I think that is less of an enthusiasm to move quickly. They know that they have to, but they are still trying to understand how would be the best way to do it. And convergence is the key word between what we do and what they will do.
So how do we get to what the title says is a global collaboration on generative AI?
Well, most importantly by doing what I tried to do last week, and I think I succeeded rather well. Well, go to each other.
Right.
Start talking to each other about this, legislator to legislator. I think the involvement of the politicians in this, and I have always said, including in the framework of the TTC, it is great when the executives are discussing, but if you really want to anchor a conversation and also go and have continuity from one administration to the next, you have to involve also the politicians and the lawmakers. So anyway, closing that bracket, I think that dialogue is key now. Not only between the EU and the US. Yes, we are two
there are many efforts,
big
like
jurisdictions.
G7 level.
There is a G7 code of conduct
partnership
proposal,
on AI.
the Hiroshima process.
Which one is your favorite? Which one do you like the most?
I don't have a favorite. I think one reality which cannot be overcome is the fact that we have a legislation, not principles, not codes of conduct. We have legislation that is going to come out we're going to finish
At the international level, usually code of conducts are the ones that
are the ones that prevail.
Most globally
there is no incompatibility between one and the other. I think it is good if there is a global effort to find a way to converge on an issue so important as generative AI foundation models.
Right.
Our legislation goes much deeper than that and makes principles, in fact, law. That is okay as well. The other jurisdictions will decide for themselves how far they want to go within their jurisdictions in terms of setting rules. But trying to have global convergence on a set of common principles, possibly also with some enforcement, I think it's the right way to approach it.
Dragos, I'd like to stop you because we've spoken for a long time, but I want to know where you are going to go to this fantastic event in London in 1 month from now.
Well, it is in 1 month from now.
The AI Safety Summit.
I haven't been invited.
You haven't been invited yet. Why hasn't Dragos been invited then? What's going on? Tell us about the summit. So we got this statement this morning. You're going to hold this AI Safety Summit focused on some specific elements of generative AI. I think mostly like really harmful users, misuse, like creating bioweapons using ChatGPT, for instance, or whatever. And also, I dare say, runaway AI. So we have this fantastic leaflet here, which has just been minted, just smells of print. What's going on, and why wasn't Dragos invited?
Thank you very much. I feel like I'm here plugging a book, but instead I'm plugging our AI summit. So yeah, we put out some more details this morning. I guess what I'd say is there's a lot happening in the international space, especially over this autumn. As we said, there's the UN process, there's the Council of Europe, there's the GPAI, there's the OECD playing a really big role. So thanks to Karine and her colleagues. And what we wanted to do with the summit is make sure it's complementary to those and fills a niche. And we did that in 2 ways. So we focused on the kind of extreme risks from frontier, the most advanced form of
the kind of catastrophic risks that our Silicon Valley friends talk us.
Yeah, the kind of risks of loss of control or of misuse. So things like big cybersecurity threats or losing control of the objectives of AI that you can imagine from some of those large foundation models that are at that very frontier. We also did it by focusing a little bit differently on the chain. So it's not primarily a regulatory summit. It's primarily looking at the risks, trying to get an agreed understanding of the risks and then how to move forward internationally.
What do you want to get out of it, essentially? Like a code of conduct again, a voluntary code of conduct, which Dragos loves?
Yeah, so there's 2 elements. The first day of the summit will have a larger group of nations invited and also civil society and industry. And that's about looking at the risks and getting a shared understanding of what those risks are and an agreement to do something about it in future. And then the second day is going to be a smaller group, G7 plus a few, which will look a little bit more closely at what we can do, how we can make sure we put in place those guardrails around the most advanced research on AI.
Right.
And that might look at the kind of ideas like President von der Leyen mentioned in her State of the Union speech, so an IPCC type organization or regulatory bodies or other task forces, much like the UK's AI task force that we've got there that looks at the most advanced research and making sure that it's done in a safe way. So you can get the benefits of that innovation of that research, but you do it with those guardrails. And we think that requires.
And those guardrails would be voluntary, right?
So that requires international agreement, and it would require, in that instance, it would require that you only do certain types of research within those guardrails in those safe environments. So no, we're looking at countries coming together and agreeing that kind of thing,
a treaty,
so that they can process in the future. So it's not a treaty. It's not at that level. There are other processes that will result in more binding issues. We're hoping that this will kick off a process that could in the future lead to further more.
So what would you call it? Like, what's a process?
So this is at the very high level, what we're trying to do is start off a series of discussions with that wider group of countries that we hope can keep going about how you do that most advanced.
So it's a start of a conversation, a great conversation, a grand conversation,
and that's why we think it's complementary to the G7 process, which is looking at moving towards guidelines and code of conducts quicker.
Can I ask two kind of slightly nasty questions?
Always.
The first one is that, of course, if you ask unfriendly observer, they say this is all a gimmick, you're following on the edge cases, which is, of course, complemented by it's kind of a scream for attention. Is it really necessary at this stage to discuss of this kind of level of risks? And the second question is, are you going to invite Dragos? And who else is going to be invited from EU institutions? Like, which commissioner, for instance?
We're on the first. So I think these are serious risks that we've all been worried about since OpenAI and the other large tech firms have been talking about some of these risks. They wrote their open letter. It's something that our government is very seized of. So I don't think we take them lightly. We, of course, don't take some of the other risks that, for instance, the AI Act deals with lightly either. And we have other approaches in the UK to do that. On the summit, what we're trying to do is invite a range of jurisdictions and civil society and industry that covers a broad geographical spread, but also those jurisdictions that are most most advanced in terms of AI technology and AI regulation. So, of course, we expect to have good representation from the EU.
Is anyone in this room going to be invited?
What we don't do as a matter of protocol on our summits is we don't confirm who's been invited and who will attend.
But China's coming.
We allow people.
We know that China's coming. That's been confirmed.
To confirm that. We have confirmed that China's coming, but that's just because there was so much public interest, and we take the view that it's impossible to have this kind of debate without China there, because they're so important and they have so many of the advanced tech industry.
Just a quick question to Dragos, and then I want to finally turn to our other guest. Do you feel a bit envious that you don't have anything of this existential risk stuff, this kind of highly sophisticated runaway AI risk provisions in your AI app? Do you want to add a little bit about, I don't know, people designing?
We do. I think people still haven't really understood what we try to do with our foundation model generative AI section in the text. Because ours, precisely because it is horizontal and because of the way we've drafted the text, that applies also to frontier models. For me, it's, of course, there are very significant risks that are associated with frontier models. I think also we have to be careful of the risk of how we define these rules so that we don't build walls around the beautiful garden where only those that have developed some of those models, proposing some self-policing, self-discipline tools, would then end up in somewhat of a monopoly for some of these models. I think that's also a very important objective.
So under the AI Act, I wouldn't be able to use ChatGPT 7 to design a bioweapon?
No.
Why not?
Or you'd be responsible for it. Of course you can.
What article would prevent me from doing that?
28B.
28B. Good. Fair enough. Okay. Karine, how are you doing? I'd like to get maybe a kind of bird's eye view from you of what is going on at the G7 level, because it seems to be the only real international effort, of the main one, that is actually making some progress. I think there is some kind of code of conduct or something similar coming out in November, possibly. That's what I heard, at least according to our colleague Mark Scott's newsletter. Can you kind of apprise us when it comes to the state of play, what's going on there, and what kind of risks are you going to tackle?
So the OECD is very involved in the G7, supporting the G7 work in the Hiroshima AI process that was just created in May. And in early September, the G7 endorsed one, work towards international guiding principles applicable to all AI actors. Two, developing a code of conduct for organizations developing advanced AI systems to be presented to G7 leaders later in the year. and 3 specific cooperative projects like the global challenge to find solutions to fight disinformation in generative AI that many organizations are involved in, including the OECD, the UNESCO, the Global Partnership on AI, IEEE, and others. And so those are so it's a very, very, very ambitious timeline, a very, very ambitious G7 presidency under Japan that wants to do very many things in a compressed time frame. And so that's what we're expecting to come out of it, is those 3 products. The international guiding principles applicable to all actors, the code of conduct, as well as then specific projects.
Voluntary, right?
Voluntary, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Is there any kind of cleavage between the pro-binding rules countries and the ones who want to keep it a bit more like touch and industry-led and voluntary? Do you think there's some kind of tension at the level? I'm sure you have a fantastic vantage point on that.
I mean, at the end of the day, there are lots of different mechanisms to regulate AI, from incentives and soft law to regulatory experimentation to flexible mechanisms like codes of conduct or responsible AI codes of conduct to hard law and bans in specific cases. And in the case of AI, and particularly generative AI, we think probably all of those instruments that policymakers have at their disposal are going to be needed, as well as standards, of course. So it's not one or the other. They're going to be complementary. They're hopefully going to go in the same direction. That is what we're working very hard on, to make sure that all these initiatives and efforts, achieve what they want to, what needs to be achieved. I will say that at the OECD, we really prone an evidence-based approach. And that's why, for example, we've been working with the EC, with the US, and with lots of other member countries on developing a framework to track incidents, AI incidents. Yeah. It's quite exciting. It's a framework, and then an initial prototype, which is available at oecd.ai/incidents, that's based on news articles, to get a sense of, maybe it's a tip of the iceberg.
What a big
at
responsibility
least
for journalists.
At least of what the press is following.
Yeah, sure. Is this mostly what you're doing, what G7 is doing, or what you're witnessing and possibly helping with, about giving clarity to AI businesses across the G7 countries and their their blocks? Is it mostly a business harmonization decision, or is it more about facing up to runaway AI or big challenges or something that will just kill us all?
So it's both. I think both are critical. We have important work streams on both. So we've been focusing a lot on near-term opportunities and challenges, and on developing responsible due diligence guidance for responsible business conduct, and on all the OECD AI principles. But more recently, we've also been focusing on longer-term impacts and implications to help governments.
It's a future AI group that OECD has just set up, right?
Exactly. And
as a parting shot, what's the most far-fetched yet very dangerous scenario that you have been researching when it comes to generative AI? What really worries you in the future, not now, not IP or copyright?
I'm not sure you want to hear. It's the stuff of movies, basically the end of the human race, or. But I think what we're trying to do here is really bring together the top researchers and research labs and others who are engaged in these discussions to anticipate possible future scenarios, and here try to so as to be in a position to influence these future developments so that they benefit people and we can avoid any of those.
How do you forecast that? Do you just sit down and start thinking, or do you read the latest research papers? What's the kind of process to understand what the hell is going to kill us?
Well, the approach we've been taking is a combination of surveys and developing different scenarios. It's the beginning of the work. It's the group has held 2 meetings so far. So we're still collecting in the surveys the different opinions of researchers. It's very subjective, but it gives us an idea of sort of the range of opinions of what's happening or what is risky. And so what we're doing is ranking these in terms of the importance, obviously, of different risks and opportunities, but also on the feasibility and how actionability of policy action to combat those risks. So it's those 2 dimensions that are really important. Trying to
no, go on.
Trying to focus on what's the most important, but also that's actionable.
Right. Do you think that grappling with generative AI is akin to grappling with climate change, which seems to be a great rhetorical device used these days?
I don't know. I think we don't really understand the nature of the generative AI beast. And it's hard to compare things that are so different. There are similarities, of course, in the need for collective action and so on, but really we don't fully understand the nature of generative AI, nor the top researchers don't actually know exactly what it's doing and why. And so
when it comes to collective action,
it's hard to compare. IPCC is working for or not working as you depending on how you see it was developed for a specific issue that we knew, and same thing for nuclear treaties and so on, and this is yet something very different. So I mean comparisons can be helpful on some elements, but it is a different beast. And again, we don't
China
really
and
fully
Russia sit at the table? Should China and Russia sit at the table when it comes to regulating generative AI?
I think they should absolutely sit at the table. There are obviously political tensions. China has been regulating in its own way and as a bit in advance in regulating different components of generative AI. There are different models of how to do that. It's obviously complicated geopolitically, but just to give you an example, the OECD AI principles of 2019 formed the basis of the G20 AI principles also of 2019. You see, and the beauty here is that they're 2 different. They're two different groupings, but the principles are the same. And so that type of solution is possible, but others are too. The UN is taking a very active role. Increasingly since the UN General Assembly last week. It's looking at creating sort of networks of networks that bring together some of these different initiatives and create that sort of plumbing in between different initiatives. And there are many initiatives everywhere.
Okay, thank you, Karine. Let's jump to Austin, who has been incredibly patient. Austin, what can you tell us? So I'm curious about, you as a person who works and confers sometimes with both politicians, also companies and other organizations in this sphere. What do you think that this whole palaver amounts to at the end of the day? Is there a genuine effort that you think is going to accomplish anything? And how are you, or are the people you work with, the companies you work with sometimes, preparing for this? What would you like to see?
Well, it's an incredible question, and I appreciate it asked in the broadness that it holds, because that is the beauty of it. I think when you asked the question a second ago of what research questions are you going to tackle first? How do you decide? Just sit down and work on it. That's something that we as an organization, SeedAI, look at pretty much exclusively. Was a founding principle that there are practical issues and problems that people have just in their communities that are, once you extrapolate them up to their logical conclusion, about the end of the world, if you want to take it there, right? But it starts for most people on like, okay, does my job exist, right? Am I going to have friends in the future? And in fact, we did a very large poll, like 10,000 people. And I didn't release it because it was just too much and kind of an info hazard. It was just confusing. And I just wanted to know, to be frank. But you can see like a wide diversity.
You didn't release it because it was too scary?
No, it was honestly just like too much information and it was too confusing, to be frank. Like people's opinions were so incoherent that it was hard to parse out, except for to understand that like we actually have an incredible amount of work to do. Now, it did back up one of my main premises, which is that people have a lot more diffuse and non-obviously bucketed sets of risks and concerns that they're thinking about, right? I mean, I have a statistically significant sample of just people that know what LangChain is, right? Which is kind of like your baseline knowledge for anything involving generative AI right now.
Right.
If you don't know in the crowd, it's fine. It lets you like string different language models and processes together so you can do closer to like agents, right? But it lets you see where experts are. And their number one concern right now is loneliness and human friendship, right?
Right.
Which is very interesting.
So what about the kind of regulation we need for generative AI? What's the kind of conversations you're having? Where do they point? And also what kind of international effort do you think is warranted?
Well, it focuses on research. I mean, I think that there's two things. The first is we have to pilot things. You literally just have to make up new things to try because the field is fairly empty outside of small expert groups. I think to the point of the incident report, you know, we worked with the White House and a number of different community groups, including a national consortium of community colleges, to bring this generative AI red team to DEF CON at Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And it started off from kind of, you know, she's saying kind of a game, kind of a small thing, and it grew up to thousands of people testing stuff, right? So on the first hand, we have to try what we can try and involve people in that process, right? So now you have AI red teaming, exploring all of this completely unknown space in these massive language models. It's kind of a core tenet of a regulatory framework, regardless of the mechanism, regardless of what agency or thing it comes from, right? So the second question, I mean, what agency are we going to have, and what are we going to like on an international basis, especially since this is an issue is so inherently tied to values, right? We're talking about regulating the commodification of human language, right? You've just taken human language as a fuzzy probability thing and made it into a tool that can be plugged into applications and products, right? And we're a 501c3, so we're a tax-exempt nonprofit. So instead of just companies, I mean, we obviously talk to companies and everybody because everybody knows a tiny slice of what the hell's going on, right? But we end up talking a lot to different communities and different folks that are trying to like accelerate research or accelerate development. What were you saying?
You know, I'd say my question actually is more like, you mentioned an agency, international agency. There's been a big conversation. The other analogy, apart from climate, is usually nuclear weapons. That generative AI is nuclear weapons. I wonder what your perspective is on open source generative AI models. Should they exist? Should generative AI be the preserve of a few well-vetted companies? What's your take on that?
Well, so two things. The first is, I get two for you too. So the first is, I mean, to say should they exist is kind of a wild question because they do. And so if you would have to make like an incredible international, extremely oppressive surveillance state to make them stop existing in their current form, and their demonstrated and stated threat as current open source tools is like, I don't think worth an international dystopian police state, right? Now, what I will say is that the open source community really wants to play and can play a powerful role in terms of kind of like a good shepherd for good governance, right? They are going to be, it's going to be different to have this kind of like dynamic atomic development, but it's such a competitive ecosystem as it stands, but the variables could be tweaked. I mean, you could easily see a competitive ecosystem exist on something like Hugging Face, right? Where you could see easily leaderboards of safety, right? Of different types of safety systems and safety criteria. Or again, because what we're going to get into very shortly is the conversation about value systems. Now, how does that as an exercise play into regulatory regimes? If nothing else, it provides like absolutely critical information that we do not have. Right? Like we lack infinite information, both in terms of what will work from mechanisms as we get more into like evolved technology, and in terms of what will actually improve this macro situation, because we are looking at the advent of like an entirely different type of computing and underlying technological frameworks that we deal with, and already AI underlies our entire lives. We're just taking like a fuzzier math component that we as humans have made our peace with, that we deal with as humans, and applying it to computers all of a sudden in like big picture, right? So assurance is not something we're going to be able to have in the same way we would prefer, because we have something non-deterministic technologically. So we either need like the most robust testing environment we could possibly have, or we're going to have to understand how to split the difference between use case regulation and then something for bigger, like dangerous.
I need you to wrap up because we have 7 minutes to go. Do you have a...
I just wanted my 15-minute rant too, man. I'm sorry.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it was very good. I'll come back to you, of course. One just quick observation to the organizers. Slido doesn't work, so I don't have the questions from the audience. Dragos, I was thinking about the letter you mentioned earlier. So in April, you sent this letter, you and other MEPs sent this letter calling on both Joe Biden and Ursula von der Leyen to hold this kind of international summit about powerful AI. It wasn't necessarily generative, but powerful. But generative, I suppose, is kind of a part of that. What has happened since? Are you happy about where things are going?
Well, what has happened since was the discussion in G7, which I think was a very good starting point.
Right.
So it showed that finally the leaders were paying attention, and ultimately this is what we wanted to do with that letter, to draw attention of our leaders that it was time that they got involved, because this issue was sufficiently serious that actually it warranted the attention of our leaders, and I think that was already achieved. Now our leaders know about AI. But I want to make 3 points, listening also to the conversation, which I think are important. I'll make them very quick. Number one, it's great that we are now focusing on generative AI and big terminators of the world. We should also not forget that AI is, our everyday AI is the one that might discriminate my kid from the kid next door, or it might discriminate me when getting a credit in the bank from my neighbor.
That's also generative AI, though, right? Can do it.
No,
well,
it's not. It's a different kind of AI. But anyway, so I think that in the big discussion that we now have on big, powerful frontier models, we should not forget the other models and the other need for regulation.
I mean, the generative AI can also be biased.
Number two, fact. Not interpretation, not subjective. Fact. We have been having general principles and commitments for quite some time. UNESCO, OECD, EU's own general principles, so on and so forth. And still, all of these models have developed and have grown to the point where they are, which I think shows that at a certain point in time, voluntary commitments and principles are great to provide some sort of guidance, but at some point you need to come in and put a clear standard to what is and is not okay to do.
But.
So I think, no, there's no but. I think, again, it is a fact that, again, commitments, voluntary nature, and principles are good only up to a point.
Right.
And I think the 3 elements is that some of these risks are not just theoretical. Again, people have actually been playing with some of the models that are already on the market, and they went all the way to the point of weaponizing a biorisk agent. Last week in Spain,
I saw that.
Pornography is being generated with our kids' faces on it. So again, these are not risks that we are just reading from a sci-fi script. These are very real, tangible, they're happening as we speak. Which means that when we talk about the responsibility that we have, not only here in the EU, but the global responsibility to actually come together and start discussing very seriously, not, sorry to say, fluffy concepts of codes and principles. They are very important, again, to guide the work. But again, I think that we have to seriously look at the risks we have and think.
Do you think the G7 is too fluffy?
No, and again, G7 had to happen, and the summit in London has to happen. Again, you said
hopefully
it yourself.
You'll be there.
We wrote it up. It doesn't matter. It's not important.
I would love to.
Again, what is important is our leaders take this seriously, and that out of all of this plethora of frameworks that we have, which was natural that they happen up to a point, that they somehow we start bringing them all together. And start discussing what could be the common place, the framework that we all agree we work around to get to the point where we have a common understanding and convergence.
Since there was no summit?
No, certainly not. We're not crying for attention. I think we have enough attention
ourselves.
You
wrote an open letter, which is kind of
but it was a different thing. No, again, our letter was the response to a letter written by 1,000 experts that said that the EU, that nobody was paying attention.
Right.
So what we said in our letter,
no summit yet.
EU is paying attention because EU is the only jurisdiction in the world that is doing something about it, very concrete. In 2 months' time, we are going to have a piece of legislation that will put these rules very clearly on the table. And number two, that yes, global leaders should be talking about it. So it wasn't, again, a cry for attention. It was a cry for action by our leaders on this very important topic.
Right. Who do you think should sit on the table? At the table, sorry, not on the table.
I'm not the organizer.
So at international level, you want to talk, you went to the US, you might go to the UK. Would you talk to the Chinese? Would you talk to the Russians? Would you talk to the Iranians?
Where I agree is that China or Russia or Iran cannot be ignored because technology is the same whether it is developed or applied here in Brussels or if it is developed and applied in Beijing. But there is a big but here. The way we understand values and the role of technology in society is very different in Beijing and in Brussels. So what I always said was that we should be first, and I think both Beijing and Moscow and Iran have clearly proven that they understand commitments and global rules of the game very differently than us.
Right.
And they apply them very differently. So what I always said was first we have to like-minded partners sit around the table, start discussing and agreeing possibly on a framework that we as like-minded we believe is important to put forward, and then of course also invite the others who are inevitably on the global stage.
So like-minded first, the others later.
I would have gone like that.
Andrew, can you defend the decision to invite China to your summit? You have 50 seconds.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really difficult to do this without China, given their importance in AI. They're consistently in the top 3 or 4 in terms of countries that are developing new AI systems. What I would say is that every jurisdiction will legislate and regulate in their own way that fits with their system. But what the international processes are about are looking at a global baseline and things like interoperability and working together on this most advanced, globally important type of AI.
Right. Will you invite Russia?
As I said, we're not confirming who we've.
I would imagine Russia's not coming, right? So it's not being invited.
We're not confirming. I think the UK government's stance on Russia is well documented.
It's well documented. Okay, fantastic. I think. I mean, what are you happy about all this patchwork going on, Dragos? What's your final take on all this?
I agree with Andrew. Number one is that jurisdictions will have to make up their own minds on what the path they want to take. And I always say that is almost less important whether we will end up with one piece of horizontal legislation here in Europe, whether in the US they will do a piece of legislation that will look very differently sectorally. In UK, they will choose a different path. What matters mostly is that, again, we have an overall understanding of the direction of travel. And this is why these fora and these kind of events are important. And again, I plead for them to happen. And that we also leave the space in the work that we do to eventually converge on standards. Very important, because engineers will work with technical standards when they will be developing the applications, whether here in the US and UK or China. So ideally, we should somewhat find a way, while having possibly or most likely diversity in the way we will regulate, but then build a framework to then start aligning ideally on standards. And if we manage that, I think we can manage the diversity between legislative approaches.
I think those words are fantastic to end, since we are, time is up, the screen says. So I suppose there's a lot of movement around it, a whirlwind of events, and I'm happy that Dragos and the others are fighting our corner in the EU at least. I think that's it. Thank you very much, all of you, and to the audience, prepare for the next and last session, DMA, What's Next, moderated by Edith Hancock. Thank you. Cheers. Thank you.